At 9:47 in the morning on June 4, 1942, deep in the basement of the 14th Naval District Headquarters at Pearl Harbor, Commander Joseph Rochefort stood motionless in front of a massive Pacific Ocean map. Tiny pins marked the known positions of American warships stretching 1,000 miles in every direction from Midway Atoll. Rochefort had not slept in 36 hours. His eyes burned from constant strain, his fingers trembled from caffeine and hunger, but none of that mattered anymore. In less than 90 minutes, American dive bombers would either find the Japanese carrier fleet or disappear into the ocean when their fuel ran out. If they found the enemy, the United States might survive in the Pacific. If they did not, Japan would dominate the ocean for the next decade. Everything balanced on that thin edge of time. For 6 relentless months, Rochefort and his small overworked team had been dismantling the Japanese Navy's most guarded secret, its operational code, JN-25B. He knew where the Japanese fleet was headed. He knew when it would arrive. He knew exactly what it contained. 4 heavy carriers, 2 light carriers, 7 battleships, 15 cruisers, and more than 40 destroyers. But intelligence alone could not win wars. Knowledge was useless unless American pilots could turn it into action in the sky. The Japanese command never believed the Americans were capable of this kind of warfare. For months, Japanese admirals dismissed them as soft, undisciplined, and tactically unimaginative. Pearl Harbor had reinforced that belief. Every campaign afterward seemed to confirm it. Hong Kong fell in days. Singapore collapsed in weeks. The Philippines endured only months before surrender. Everywhere the Japanese advanced, the Allies retreated. To Tokyo, it looked like destiny. Even Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the architect of Japan's naval strategy, carried these assumptions. He had lived in the United States, studied at Harvard, served in Washington, and understood American industry better than most of his peers. Yet he came away convinced that American naval officers lacked professional seriousness. He believed they preferred comfort to sacrifice, routine to risk. That belief shaped everything. At Pearl Harbor, he assumed American carriers would be docked because Americans followed predictable schedules. At Midway, he assumed they would react slowly and conventionally. He spread his fleet across millions of square miles because he believed Americans lacked the intelligence capability to detect him in time. That assumption had already cost lives. On the night of December 7, 1941, just hours after Pearl Harbor burned, Japanese destroyers bombarded Midway Atoll under cover of darkness. First Lieutenant George Cannon, commanding a Marine artillery battery, was nearly killed when a shell obliterated his command post. His leg was shattered. Shrapnel tore into his chest. His men tried to carry him away, but Cannon refused. Bleeding out, he stayed at his position for 40 minutes, directing fire that struck both destroyers and forced them to withdraw early. He died shortly after midnight. He was 26 years old. Japan assumed the attack would be casual. It was not. Cannon's stand was the first crack in Japanese certainty, but the price was paid in blood. That pattern repeated across the Pacific. Japan won battle after battle, but never as easily as planned. Wake Island resisted. Bataan held for months. Singapore fell, but not cheaply. Beneath the impressive red arrows on Japanese maps, resistance hardened. Admiral Chester Nimitz understood this. From Pearl Harbor, he watched the empire expand without panic. Japan had tactical momentum, not strategic dominance. Supply lines stretched thin. Forces were scattered. And Nimitz possessed something Yamamoto did not: codebreakers. Joseph Rochefort was unlike any officer the Navy had known. A high school dropout turned intelligence savant, he spoke fluent Japanese, understood the culture intimately, and possessed an instinctive grasp of cryptanalysis. Station Hypo, his unit, operated in a cold, windowless basement filled with IBM machines and exhausted men. Musicians, reservists, linguists, Rochefort chose them for pattern recognition, not rank. They worked endlessly, sleeping in shifts, eating at desks, living inside static and numbers. Rochefort himself wore carpet slippers and a red smoking jacket, caring nothing for appearances. Washington hated him. Pearl Harbor trusted him. By April 1942, Station Hypo was reading nearly 40% of Japanese naval traffic. That was enough. Rochefort began seeing repeated references to an operation against a target called AF. The scale was massive. This was not a raid. This was invasion. Every clue pointed toward Midway, but Washington disagreed. Alaska, Port Moresby, Hawaii. Opinions conflicted. Nimitz needed certainty. He had only 3 carriers. One wrong decision would end the war. Rochefort devised a gamble. Midway broadcast an unencrypted message claiming its water distillation system had failed and supplies were running low. Within days, Japanese intelligence reported, using JN-25B, that AF was suffering a freshwater shortage and recommended bringing desalination equipment. The proof was undeniable. AF was Midway. Nimitz made his decision. Yorktown limped into Pearl Harbor, barely afloat after Coral Sea. Engineers said 90 days. Nimitz gave them 72 hours. Shipyard crews worked without pause, cutting steel, welding decks, rewiring systems. Yorktown sailed with repairmen still aboard. The trap was set. At dawn on June 4th, radar at Midway detected incoming aircraft. Japanese bombs fell. Fighters died. But the airfield survived. And then the call came, Japanese carriers spotted. American carriers launched everything. Lieutenant Commander Wade McClusky led Enterprise's dive bombers into empty sky. At the intercept point, nothing. Fuel gauges dropped. Pilots turned back. McClusky pressed on. Then he saw a lone destroyer racing north. He followed instinct. At 10:15, the horizon filled with wakes. 4 carriers. Decks crowded with fueled aircraft. Maximum vulnerability. At 10:22, the sky fell. Bombs punched through decks into hangars packed with fuel and munitions. Fires erupted instantly. Kaga burned. Akagi turned helplessly in circles. Soryu vanished beneath explosions. In 4 minutes, Japan lost 3 fleet carriers. The 4th struck back, crippling Yorktown before dying itself by evening. Nagumo never understood how the Americans found him. Yamamoto never recovered. Japan lost pilots it could not replace with equal skill. Confidence shattered. Doctrine collapsed. The war turned. Midway was not luck. It was intelligence, courage, and risk. Rochefort was punished. McClusky nearly died. Best lost his lungs. Torpedo crews were annihilated. But history changed. Wars do not turn on destiny. They turn in basements, in cockpits, in moments when someone refuses to turn back. Midway ended Japan's offensive forever. And it began with a man in slippers, staring at a map, waiting for time to run out.